Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Family Support Podcast. My name's Yvonne Thorogood. I'm the Quality and Development Officer at Homestart UK, and with me I've got Jenny Rowe and Steve Griffiths, who are Quality Improvement Specialists. Today's podcast, we will go through the indicators needed for this self-assessment and the evidence that you need to supply. But before we get into the podcast, I want to give our listeners a bit of an update. After some feedback from the network around submitting the Governance and Leadership self-assessment, we have changed the web form so that you cannot move on until you have saved one indicator at a time. This will hopefully prevent any loss of work going forward and will make the self-assessment process a bit smoother and more efficient. So, coming back into talking about the Family Support Podcast, as I say, I've got Jenny and Steve with me, and they're going to talk you through the indicators and the evidence needed. So I shall hand over to you now, Steve.
Hello, my name's Steve, and today we're going to look at the Family Support Standard. And the first part, we will go through the indicators. And in the second part, we'll look at the evidence that's required for the self-assessment. For most part, the type of evidence that we're going to ask you to upload for this particular self-assessment will depend on what you have available in your local organisation. So, for instance, we only want you to upload against indicator 005, and Jenny will cover that later on in the podcast. I would now like Jenny to introduce herself to you.
Hi everyone, my name's Jenny Rowe and I'm a Quality Assurance Specialist alongside Steve.
Jenny, would you like to say a little bit about your background of actually working in the network?
Yeah, so I joined Homestart UK as a Quality Improvement Specialist about a year ago. Prior to that, I was in local authority, but prior to that, I was part of the network for around 15 years. So my journey started off very much like a lot of others in a voluntary role, and I was a home visiting volunteer. I became a trustee and a treasurer within a local Homestart. And then as I moved house, I moved around 3 different Homestarts, and I was the manager in the last one for around 8 years. So I've very much been on both sides now.
Thank you, Jenny. So in the first part of this podcast, I'm going to ask Jenny about each indicator in the Family Support Standard and ask her just to go through what are the key things that we would expect to see in your narrative about how you actually meet this indicator.
So we're going to start looking at FSU 001, which is a focus of relational support must be at the core of every Homestart. And in this, we would like to see, or for you to be able to evidence that you've got information maybe on your website, on your Facebook, on your social media pages, and also information that you give to families. That might be a welcome leaflet, it might be an induction pack that you take out when you're going through an initial visit or on review visits to explain how the service is run and what the expectations are.
Thanks, Jenny. And just to clarify that that's what we would like people to put in their narrative, but we don't actually ask you to send any of those things into us as actual documentary evidence for this exercise.
Thanks, Steve. So moving on to FSU 002, the indicator is local Homestarts must offer home visiting support as part of their service. And in the narrative, we'd like to see records of home visiting, maybe the type of recording system that you use, whether that's paper or whether that's a database such as Charity Log. And you would evidence this maybe through the narrative, saying what your business plan covers and monitoring reports around your home visits, the volumes, who that's done by, volunteers or some staff visiting. and then checks with staff and trustees would also evidence and having conversations that this is actually taking place as it should be.
Thank you, Jenny.
Moving on to FSU 003, local home starts must offer trained volunteer support as part of their home visiting model. So records of trained volunteers and checks with volunteers and their training records should be evident within their training, within their volunteer file for training records, or you may keep an overall spreadsheet of which volunteers done which training. And this will include things like their annual safeguarding training, their preparation course, and any additional training that you offer. FSU 004, each local home start must include support for families with children aged 5 years or under as part of its core service. So again, your records would show, whether that be paper-based or computerised, that your families have children within that criteria, so children aged 5 and under.
Thank you.
FSU 005, so local home start boards must remain fully appraised of the support offered to families in order to ensure appropriate governance over skills, training, support and regulation. So most often board reports would reflect conversations, and most often staff, or particularly the senior member of staff, the manager, would submit a board report, and this would cover items such as safeguarding issues, the amount of families that are being supported, maybe the complexities within the families. Some would show maybe case studies. It would also show, if you were supporting group families, how many this was, and that would give your board a clear indicator of your capacity and what the home starts are supporting regarding numbers. So I think, Steve, you mentioned earlier that this is the evidence that we would like local home starts to submit, so we might be looking for a manager's report with those details on.
Thank you, Jenny. So just to recap, those first 5 indicators are the musts or the requirements, and they come directly from the handbook. Now Jenny's going to move on to looking at the next 4 indicators, which are the good practice indicators.
Thanks, Steve. So next is FSU 006. Local home starts should monitor the demographics of families supported so that we can assess our impact across the Federation. In your narrative, therefore, you may describe how you come about the data, your demographic data, where you pull that from. It might be local information or national statistics that are narrowed down to your geographical area. And then you would put that within your report and evaluate and monitor against that. Next is FSU 007. If there is consistently higher demand for support than you are able to provide, senior staff and or the local home start board should formally review capacity or consider new routes to offering support. So in the narrative, we'd like you to consider what you would do if you do have a waiting list. So do you have a procedure? Is that written down? How do you manage the families that are on the waiting list? Discussions with staff and communication with funders and commissioners, and signposting arrangements and how you record those would come under that narrative. Moving on to HSQA1, families are the focus of local home starts. Values and approaches are explicit, informing the design and delivery of service and activities. The organisation advocates for the voice of the families. So again, in your narrative, we'll be looking for information about how you go about this. So also information in your case files. Maybe you attend multi-agency meetings to support the family. There might be information on your website directing families to other support, information that might be given to your families around the offer of services, and again, evaluating and having evidence of that evaluation within your report. HSQA2 is the last indicator. The local Home Start can demonstrate their relational and evidence-based approach to supporting families and the range of needs they are addressing. So this would also cover your group work if you have groups, reviewing of families, some reflective practice, whether you send out questionnaires to family, how you gather the voice of families. It could be outcome monitoring, so the journey that the family's been on from the beginning of the support and your initial visit through to the end of the support and the closure. It could be evidence within training records on how you supported volunteers in order to support the family's needs ongoing. Other evidence-based practice and supervision would be clearly identified for volunteers and for staff, so the journey through that family can be seen. Outcome reports, again, is around the journey of the family, and this would probably be pulled together also within your annual report, and there would be a very clear idea about the support that you've offered throughout the 12-month period.
Thank you, Jenny. So that finishes off looking at the indicators. And now I just want to talk to Jenny just about some general things that we in the quality team look for in the self-assessment submissions. So Jenny, I always think that what I'm looking for is just an honest reflection in the narrative of where a local Home Start is at. We are not looking for perfection because it's a snapshot in time and quality is about continual improvement. What's your view about that?
I think very similar to yours, Steve, and actually I think each Home Start probably reflects their community that they're working in and should do. So I think the core offer is there that we're working with children under 5, we're supporting through home visiting, but that needs to reflect the demographics also that we're working in. So if you've got a higher percentage of a certain population or with certain needs, that actually would be reflected in the supporting guidance that you give to volunteers in order to support families in the best way that they can.
Yes, and I think what's important from our point of view, when we're evaluating the self-assessments, we are very reliant on what people put in the narrative. So it's really good to make your narrative clear and also just make sure it addresses the different elements that are actually stated in the indicator. Jenny, could we now just have a look again at the evidence that's required for this self-assessment, as there's a bit more flexibility than there was for the governance and leadership and the protecting families self-assessment submissions. So Jenny, the evidence that we require is against indicator FSU 005. And could you just say a bit about the type of documents that would be relevant evidence for that indicator, Jenny?
Yes, thanks, Steve. So as Steve said, this is more flexible and we're really trying to pull out how you report and what is reported to the board. So this is most likely would be through a manager's report, and it would include things like how many referrals have been received, where those referrals have come from, if there's a waiting list, how you're managing that, and the support that you're offering to families. So often that would be all wrapped up within a manager's or a senior person's report to the board. If for some reason managers aren't doing those reports and that information is just kept within board minutes because it's been given verbally, then your most recent set of board minutes, it will be adequate. So we only need not 12 as is in the self-assessment document. So we're just looking for either your most recent board minutes with that information in, or another document, usually the manager's report, that would include that information.
Thank you, Jenny. That's really helpful. So just to clarify, on the evidence side, you don't need to look at the list of mandatory evidence that's required for a full quality review. We are only asking you to upload one piece of evidence, as Jenny has described, for indicator FSU 005. So that ends our podcast today in terms of going through the indicators and the evidence for the family support self-assessment. I'd just now like to hand over to my colleague Yvonne, who will tell you what will happen next.
Thanks, Steve. You can find all the support that you need around filling in the family support self-assessment on At Home. And if you have got any questions that you can't find answers to on the internet, do drop us a line at quality@home-start.org.uk and one of us will pick that up and come back to you. You can follow our podcast on YouTube. The playlist link will be at the top of the page on At Home. And it's a great way to just be able to listen to these sessions either whilst you're walking, working, driving, and just be able to help you through the next self-assessment unit. As I say, any questions, do get in touch. We're more than happy to chat with the network. And big thank you to Steve and Jenny today for chatting through the family support self-assessment.
Thank you, Yvonne. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.